The morning sun streamed through the large windows of San Francisco International Airport's Terminal B as Robert Chen made his way to the first-class check-in counter. As a senior investment banker at Wilson & Brooks, he was used to the finer things in life. His perfectly pressed navy suit, imported Italian leather briefcase, and the confident click of his designer shoes against the polished floor all screamed success. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," the airline staff greeted him with practiced politeness. "Window seat 3A as you prefer." Robert nodded, barely glancing up from his phone where he was typing out another stern email to his junior associates. The exclusive first-class lounge welcomed him with its familiar comfort. He settled into his usual corner, ordering his traditional pre-flight espresso. Around him, other business travelers in crisp suits and elegant dresses carried on quiet conversations about market trends and quarterly reports. This was his world, a world of privilege and polish. As boarding time approached, Robert gathered his things, being among the first to walk down the jet bridge. The flight attendant at the door, Linda, recognized him from his frequent trips to Austin. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Chen. May I take your jacket?" Just as he was getting comfortable in his leather seat, adjusting the recline to his preferred angle, movement in the aisle caught his attention. A man in a simple black t-shirt and well-worn jeans was approaching the first-class cabin. His hair looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, and he carried a basic backpack that had seen better days. The man was focused on his phone, occasionally running his hand through his messy hair. Robert watched, expecting the flight attendant to direct this clearly lost passenger toward the economy section. Instead, to his growing disbelief, the casual stranger settled into the seat across the aisle. The man immediately pulled out a worn notebook filled with what looked like technical drawings and began scribbling intensely. "Excuse me, Linda," Robert called out, keeping his voice just loud enough to be heard by those nearby. "I thought first class had certain standards." He glanced meaningfully at the man in the t-shirt, who appeared completely absorbed in whatever he was drawing. Linda smiled diplomatically. "I assure you, sir, all our passengers are properly ticketed." She moved away smoothly, leaving Robert stewing in his seat. He pulled out his phone, opening his banking app to check that he'd really paid over $5,000 for this ticket. Surely, the airline wasn't just letting anyone with a few extra dollars wander into first class. The casual passenger now had his tray table covered with papers, sketching what looked like circles and cylinders with quick, confident strokes. Robert couldn't help but notice other passengers stealing glances at the man, some with obvious recognition in their eyes. But that couldn't be right. Who important would dress like that? As the remaining passengers filed past toward economy, several did double takes of the sight of the casually dressed man. A few even fumbled with their phones, trying to snap discreet photos. Robert felt his irritation growing. Was this some social media influencer or startup kid who'd gotten lucky with crypto? The pre-flight announcements began, but Robert's attention stayed fixed on his unusual cabin mate. There was something oddly familiar about the man's profile, something he'd seen before, perhaps on CNBC or Bloomberg. But no, successful people dressed the part. That was just a basic rule of business, one this scruffy stranger clearly hadn't learned. As the flight attendants began their final checks before takeoff, Robert couldn't shake his growing irritation. The man in the black t-shirt had spread out even more papers across his tray table, completely absorbed in whatever he was drawing. The casual way he occupied the space, as if he belonged there, seemed to mock everything Robert had worked so hard to achieve. "Would you care for a pre-departure beverage?" Linda approached with her professional smile. Robert ordered his usual scotch on the rocks, making sure to emphasize the brand name just loud enough for others to hear. When Linda turned to the man across the aisle, he barely looked up from his drawings, just quietly requesting water. "Just water." Robert couldn't help but comment, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I suppose not everyone can appreciate fine spirits." He took a deliberate sip of his scotch, savoring both the taste and his sense of superiority. A few rows ahead, a woman in a business suit turned around, her eyes widening as she glanced between Robert and the casual passenger. The flight began its taxi to the runway, but Robert's attention kept drifting to his unusual cabin mate. The man was now typing rapidly on his phone, occasionally pausing to jot something in his notebook. His handwriting was barely legible from where Robert sat, all sharp angles and hurried strokes, like someone who couldn't be bothered with proper penmanship. "I hope you don't mind me asking," Robert said, his voice dripping with forced politeness, "but what brings you to Austin? Tech conference? Maybe one of those startup meetups?" He emphasized startup like it was something he'd found stuck to his shoe. The man in black finally looked up, meeting Robert's gaze with surprisingly intense eyes. For a brief moment, Robert felt a flicker of uncertainty. There was something in that look, a quiet confidence that didn't need designer labels or practiced sophistication to prove itself. But before either could speak, the engines roared to life for takeoff. As they climbed into the clouds, Robert noticed more passengers stealing glances at the casual stranger. A young flight attendant seemed to hover nearby more than necessary, trying to catch glimpses of whatever he was drawing. It was starting to feel like Robert was missing something obvious. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and Linda returned to take drink orders for the flight. This time, she lingered a moment longer at the stranger's seat, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine interest in his quiet responses. Robert watched as she actually wrote down something the man suggested, nodding enthusiastically. "I've been flying first class for 15 years, Robert announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying through the cabin. "It's nice to see some people still maintain certain standards." He straightened his tie meaningfully, but to his annoyance, several passengers were giving him disapproving looks rather than the agreeing nods he'd expected. A businessman across the aisle was now openly staring at the casual passenger, frantically typing something on his phone. Whatever he read made his eyes go wide, and he quickly nudged his seatmate, showing her the screen. Their whispered conversation was just loud enough for Robert to catch fragments. "Can't believe it's actually worth billions. Should we say something?" Robert felt a creeping sense of unease. The casual stranger hadn't reacted to any of the attention, positive or negative. He just kept working on his drawings, which Robert could now see included what looked like complex mathematical equations alongside sketches of what might have been rocket engines. The man's complete indifference to Robert's comments was somehow more irritating than any response would have been. The flight had reached its cruising altitude when Robert decided he'd had enough of the mystery. The casual passenger's presence was like an itch he couldn't scratch, especially now that half the cabin seemed to be watching him with a mix of excitement and awe. Even the flight attendants kept finding excuses to pass by his seat, offering extra pillows and snacks that hadn't been requested. Robert pulled out his laptop, making a show of opening complex financial spreadsheets. "You know," he said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "some of us actually earned our way into first class through years of hard work." He glanced pointedly at the man's worn jeans and scuffed sneakers. The stranger looked up from his notebook, and for the first time, Robert got a clear view of what he was working on. The pages were filled with intricate diagrams of what looked like spacecraft components, with detailed calculations scribbled in the margins. The man's eyes met Robert's with a hint of amusement, but he remained silent, returning to his work. "Plain rocket scientist, are we?" Robert couldn't help but sneer. "I suppose everyone's an expert these days, thanks to the internet." He tapped his own screen, displaying complex investment portfolios. "Some of us deal with real numbers, not science fiction drawings." A couple of young tech workers seated behind them exchanged knowing looks and struggled to hide their smiles. One pulled out his phone and started recording discreetly. The other whispered something that sounded suspiciously like, "He has no idea." Linda appeared with the lunch service, presenting the first-class menu. "Our chef has prepared something special today," she said, paying particular attention to the casual passenger's preferences. "And sir, the pilot wanted me to ask if you'd like to visit the cockpit after the meal. He's a huge fan of your work." Robert nearly choked on his water. The pilot wanted to meet this scruffy stranger. He watched in disbelief as the man politely declined the offer, explaining in a quiet voice that he preferred to finish his work. His accent was unusual, a mix of South African and American that tickled something in Robert's memory. "I've never seen a pilot invite someone to the cockpit before," Robert said loudly. "Must be nice having friends in low places." He emphasized the word low with a smirk, but his comment fell flat as several passengers shot him disapproving looks. The man in black finally spoke directly to Robert, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You know, "I've found that making assumptions about people often says more about us than them." He smiled slightly, then returned to his drawings, adding detailed notes about what appeared to be thrust calculations. A businesswoman across the aisle gasped softly, finally recognizing the voice. She frantically typed something on her phone, then showed it to her seatmate. Soon, a wave of whispers spread through the first-class cabin, accompanied by the occasional flash of a phone camera. Robert felt increasingly uneasy. The stranger's calm demeanor in the face of his remarks was unsettling, and the reactions of other passengers suggested he was missing something obvious. He pulled out his own phone, determined to figure out why this casual passenger commanded such attention. Just then, the man received a phone call. "Yes, the Starship modifications look promising," he said into his phone, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet cabin. "Tell the team at SpaceX we'll review the changes as soon as I land." He paused, listening. "And yes, make sure the Tesla team has the new battery specs for the upcoming model." Robert's face drained of color as realization began to dawn. His fingers trembled as he quickly searched recent news about SpaceX and Tesla, his stomach sinking with each article he found. The photos matched. The voice matched. The casual style matched. He had spent the last hour insulting one of the world's most influential entrepreneurs, and based on the phones recording around him, his behavior wouldn't remain private for long. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted dramatically. Robert sat frozen in his seat, his half-eaten lunch growing cold as he scrolled through news articles about the man across the aisle. Each headline made him sink lower into his leather seat, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. Two young software engineers from a well-known tech company were now openly watching the scene unfold, their phones discreetly recording every moment. "I can't believe this guy spent an hour insulting the person who revolutionized electric cars and space travel," one whispered to the other, not quite quietly enough. The casual passenger, who Robert now realized was none other than Elon Musk himself, continued working on his rocket designs, seemingly unbothered by the growing attention around him. His phone buzzed constantly with messages, which he answered between sketches, occasionally making notes about solar panel efficiency and battery improvements. Linda, the flight attendant, approached with a fresh cup of coffee for Musk. "I hope you don't mind," she said warmly, "but my son is studying aerospace engineering because of you. Your work has inspired so many young people." Her professional mask had melted into genuine admiration. Robert watched this interaction with growing horror, remembering his earlier comments about maintaining standards and earning his place in first class. The man he'd been mocking was worth more than the entire bank he worked for. The irony was almost too much to bear. A gentle voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The plane bumped slightly, causing Robert to spill his drink on his expensive suit. Musk simply steadied his coffee cup without looking up, his hand automatically moving to secure his technical drawings. "Would you like some napkins?" Musk offered, finally acknowledging Robert directly. His tone was kind, without a hint of the smugness Robert knew he himself would have shown in a reversed situation. This only made Robert feel worse. The businessman behind them could no longer contain himself. "Mr. Musk, I apologize for interrupting, but I just wanted to say that your presentation on sustainable energy at last month's conference changed our company's entire approach to manufacturing." Musk responded with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about the company's sustainability initiatives. Robert listened to their conversation, amazed at how the world's richest man could sound so down-to-earth, so genuinely interested in a stranger's work. More passengers began sharing their stories, how Tesla's innovations had inspired them, how SpaceX had rekindled their childhood dreams of space exploration, how their children had developed an interest in science because of his work. Through it all, Musk remained humble, redirecting praise to his teams and encouraging people to pursue their own innovations. Robert's phone buzzed with a message from his boss. "Is it true? Are you really on a flight with Elon Musk?" Before he could respond, another message arrived. "There's a video going viral of someone in first class making condescending remarks to a casually dressed passenger. Please tell me that's not you." The reality of his situation hit Robert like a bucket of cold water. His carefully cultivated image of success, The expensive suit, the practiced superiority, the disdain for those who didn't fit his narrow view of importance, suddenly seemed not just foolish but painfully shallow. Here was a man who could buy the airline they were flying on without blinking, yet he chose to travel in a simple black t-shirt, focused on creating and innovating rather than impressing strangers. As more videos appeared online, Robert noticed other passengers giving him a wide range of looks, from amusement to disapproval to outright pity. His earlier words about earning his place in first class echoed in his mind, now sounding as hollow as his designer watch felt on his wrist. The revelation of Elon Musk's identity spread through the plane like wildfire. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, walked past on his way to the bathroom and stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes went wide as saucers, and he tapped excitedly at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, Mom, look, it's really him. It's the space rocket guy." The mother tried to quietly hurry her son along, but the boy's excitement was contagious. Soon, a small line of passengers formed in the aisle, each hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous entrepreneur. Unlike many celebrities who might have shown annoyance, Musk handled the attention with gentle patience. "My daughter wants to be an engineer because of you," one passenger said, showing a photo on her phone of a young girl surrounded by science fair projects. She built a mini solar panel system for her school. Musk's face lit up with genuine interest. "That's fantastic," he said, looking at the photo carefully. "Tell her to keep building things. The world needs more young innovators." He even took a moment to record a brief encouraging message for the girl. Robert watched the scene unfold, his embarrassment deepening with each passing moment. The videos of his earlier behavior had now reached several popular social media platforms. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, messages from colleagues, friends, and even his mother, who had somehow already seen the clips. "I raised you better than this," read his mother's text, making him feel like a scolded schoolboy rather than a successful banker. A tech reporter from a major news outlet, who happened to be in economy class, had made her way forward and was now documenting the scene. In an incredible display of humility, Elon Musk quietly endured over an hour of condescending remarks from a fellow passenger who failed to recognize him. She typed on her phone, the words clearly visible to Robert from his seat. The contrast between Musk's behavior and his own became painfully clear. While Robert had spent the flight trying to prove his importance through expensive clothes and arrogant remarks, Musk had been focused on actual work, sketching rocket designs, solving engineering problems, and responding to genuine questions from curious passengers. Mr. Musk, the young boy from earlier, had returned, clutching a paper airplane he'd made from the safety instruction card. "Do you think this design could fly to Mars?" Instead of dismissing the child, Musk took the paper airplane and examined it carefully. "Well, let's think about this scientifically," he said, pointing out different parts of the design. "For Mars, we'd need to consider the atmosphere's density, which is quite different from Earth's." Robert watched as Musk spent several minutes explaining basic aerospace concepts to the boy, making complex ideas simple enough for a child to understand. The boy's face glowed with excitement, and several nearby passengers recorded this heartwarming moment. Meanwhile, Robert's professional world was imploding through his phone screen. His firm's PR department had sent an urgent message. "We're receiving media inquiries about an incident involving one of our senior bankers on a flight with Elon Musk. Please call immediately." A quick check of his social media showed that the video clips had already garnered hundreds of thousands of views. Comments flooded in. "Imagine being so full of yourself that you don't recognize the richest man in the world. And this is what happens when you judge people by their clothes instead of their character." The most painful part wasn't the public humiliation or even the potential professional consequences. It was watching Musk continue to treat him with kindness despite everything. When the flight attendant accidentally spilled water on Robert's laptop, Musk was the first to offer his napkin, showing more concern for a stranger's property than Robert had shown for his dignity. As the flight entered its final hour, the full impact of Robert's actions began to unfold like a slow-motion train wreck. His phone had become a constant reminder of his mistake, buzzing every few seconds with new notifications. The viral videos had taken on a life of their own, spawning memes, news articles, and endless social media discussions. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning, read a text from his company's CEO. Your presence is required. The formal tone sent chills down Robert's spine. In 15 years at the firm, he'd never been summoned like this. The flight attendants, who had been so attentive to him on previous flights, now barely made eye contact when passing his seat. Instead, they hovered around Musk's area, their professional courtesy mixed with genuine respect. One of them quietly shared how her brother's Tesla had saved his life during a near accident, thanks to its advanced safety features. The autopilot detected the danger before I could, Musk explained to the group that had gathered around him. But the real credit goes to our engineering team. They're the ones who work tirelessly to make these safety systems better every day. Robert's company inbox was now flooding with internal messages. The video had reached their major clients, and several had expressed concern about working with someone who showed such poor judgment. His carefully built reputation as a skilled relationship manager was crumbling with each new view and share. A business news website had already published an article, Banking Executives First-Class Faux Pas, a lesson in humility at 35,000 feet. They'd even found his LinkedIn profile and professional history. The comments section was filling up with stories from people who'd had similar encounters with judgmental executives. Your recent behavior has been brought to our attention. Read an email from the airline's frequent flyer program. We're reviewing your membership status. Robert's stomach churned. He'd accumulated over 1 million miles with them, and now even that symbol of status was at risk. The young tech workers who had recorded everything were now editing their videos, adding captions and context. Watch till the end to see his face when he realizes. One of them whispered, just loud enough for Robert to hear. Their barely concealed laughter felt like needles under his skin. What hurt most was watching Musk continue his work with unshaken focus. He moved from rocket designs to reviewing Tesla production schedules, then to examining solar panel efficiency reports. Each document that passed through his hands represented real innovation, actual change in the world, a sharp contrast to Robert's world of moving money between accounts. A group of high school students returning from a science competition had somehow heard about Musk's presence and gathered near his seat. Instead of shooing them away, he spent time answering their questions about renewable energy and space exploration. His eyes lit up when they showed him their project about sustainable agriculture on Mars. The future belongs to those who build it, Musk told the students, not those who judge it. Though he wasn't looking at Robert, the words hit home with devastating accuracy. Robert's daughter called next. Dad, please tell me that viral video isn't you, she pleaded. My friends are sharing it everywhere. Even my teachers have seen it. The disappointment in her voice was worse than any angry email from his bosses. Looking around the cabin, Robert noticed how many passengers were wearing ordinary clothes, t-shirts, jeans, comfortable travel wear. He'd never realized how ridiculous his obsession with appearance must have seemed. The most innovative mind in modern business sat across from him in a simple black t-shirt, while he used his expensive suit as armor to feel superior. As the plane began its descent into Austin, Robert felt like his entire world had shifted on its axis. The setting sun painted the cabin in golden hues, a stark contrast to the darkness he felt inside. His phone had finally stopped buzzing, not because the storm had passed, but because it had run out of battery, much like his own energy. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach to Austin. And Mr. Musk, the entire crew wants to thank you for choosing our airline today. Your work continues to inspire us all. Several passengers broke into spontaneous applause. Musk responded with a modest nod, already packing away his drawings and notes. Robert watched as he carefully organized papers filled with innovations that would probably change the world in the coming years. Sir, Linda approached Robert's seat one last time, her professional mask firmly in place. The airport security team has requested that you exit the aircraft last. They're concerned about media presence at the gate. The words hit him like a physical blow. His actions had created such a spectacle that even airport security had to adjust their protocols. Through the window, Robert could see the gathering crowd at the terminal. News of Musk's arrival had spread, and people pressed against the windows, phones ready to capture any glimpse of the tech pioneer. Among them, he spotted several reporters with professional cameras. As the plane touched down, Musk finally turned to address Robert directly. He said in his distinct accent, I once had a teacher who told me I'd never amount to anything because I wasn't paying attention in class. I was actually drawing rocket designs in my notebook. He smiled slightly. The clothes don't make the person, the dreams and the work do. Robert felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. I don't know what to say, he managed to stammer. I've been so foolish. Everyone makes mistakes, Musk replied. The question is what you learn from them. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Robert. We're always looking for people who can admit when they're wrong and grow from it. Sometimes the best innovations come from changing our perspective. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Many stopped to thank Musk or ask for quick photos, which he graciously accommodated. Robert noticed how he made each person feel heard, even if just for a moment. A young boy who couldn't have been more than 12 approached Musk with a paper rocket he'd been working on during the flight. Sir, could you sign this? I want to work for SpaceX someday. Better yet, Musk said, taking the paper rocket, let me show you how to improve the design. He spent his last few minutes on the plane adding notes and explanations to the boy's creation, completely ignoring the growing media presence visible through the windows. As other passengers disembarked, Robert remained seated, dreading the walk through the terminal. His carefully constructed world of status symbols and superficial respect had crumbled, leaving him with an uncomfortable but valuable truth. Real success wasn't about appearing important, it was about making a genuine difference. Linda returned one final time. The coast is clear now, sir. You can deplane. Her tone was professional but carried a hint of sympathy. As Robert stood to leave, she added quietly, everyone gets a chance to rewrite their story. Looking back at his seat, Robert noticed the in-flight magazine he'd dismissed earlier. On its cover was a feature about innovation and entrepreneurship. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent hours judging someone based on appearances while sitting next to living proof that true success comes from vision, hard work, and treating others with respect. Stepping into the terminal, Robert made a decision. He'd take this humbling experience not as an end, but as a beginning. Maybe it was time to care less about looking successful and more about actually making a difference. After all, the most influential person he'd ever met had spent a 3-hour flight focused on creating rather than impressing. His phone would soon power back on to face the full storm of consequences, but for now, Robert walked through the quiet terminal with a new understanding. Success wasn't about the suit you wore or the seat you sat in, it was about what you contributed to the world. And maybe, just maybe, this embarrassing viral moment would be the push he needed to start contributing something real.